It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when everything changed. The house smelled faintly of jasmine tea, the same scent my husband used to love. I was sitting by the window, watching the light fall softly across the living room floor, the same floor he had polished by hand 25 years ago. Then, the front door slammed. "Mom, we need to talk." My daughter's voice cut through the calm. There was no warmth in it anymore, just impatience. She marched into the room, heels clicking against the wood, followed by her husband, who barely looked at me. She didn't even sit down. She just dropped a thick stack of papers on the table with a loud thud. "Sign these," she said flatly. "It's time to transfer the house to my name. It'll be easier for everyone if we handle it now." I looked at her, really looked at her. And for a moment, I didn't recognize the woman standing there. Her face was the same, but the eyes had changed. Cold, calculating. I brushed my fingertips against the papers. The title deed. Transfer documents. Legal seals? It felt like touching ice. "Sign it over?" I asked softly, my voice trembling just a little. "Why the rush, dear?" She rolled her eyes. "Because, Mom, you're getting older. If something happens to you, this house will get tied up in illegal nonsense." "You wouldn't want that, would you?" Her tone was sweet, but her words were knives wrapped in sugar. Her husband cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. "It's just a formality, really. Everyone does it these days. We'll take care of things for you." I looked between them, my daughter, the little girl I'd once rocked to sleep, and the man she'd married, who never once called me Mom. A lump rose in my throat. "This house," I whispered, "was built by your father and me. Every inch of it holds a piece of our lives." "Exactly," she snapped. "And it's time to stop living in the past. You're alone here, Mom. You don't even use half these rooms. Wouldn't it be better if we just took over?" Her words hung heavy in the air. For a long time, I didn't speak. The only sound was the ticking of the clock, the one my husband had fixed over and over just to keep it alive. Inside, my heart was breaking. But outside, I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile you give when you've already cried too many times, when you finally understand that love doesn't always stay gentle. "I see," I said quietly. "You want me to sign the home your father and I built. Over to you." She crossed her arms. "Yes. Today. Let's not make this difficult." I picked up the pen, turning it between my fingers. For a brief moment, she relaxed, thinking I would surrender, but I didn't sign. Instead, I placed the pen down slowly and looked at her with a calmness that seemed to unsettle her. "You know, dear," I said softly, "your father always told me to read everything twice before I sign." Her brow furrowed. "Mom, what are you talking about?" I smiled again, the faintest curve of my lips. "Nothing, darling. Nothing at all, but deep inside, a memory stirred, a memory of a locked drawer. Of a letter my husband once said, 'Keep this safe, you might need it one day.' I hadn't thought of it in years, but now it pulsed in my mind like a heartbeat. I stood up slowly, pushing the papers back across the table. "Let me think about it," I said. "I'll call you when I've made my decision." My daughter looked stunned, almost offended. "Mom, this isn't up for discussion." But I was already walking away, my hand brushing against the old photograph of my husband and me by the staircase. His smile in that picture seemed to whisper something only I could hear. "Not yet," I murmured to myself. "Not yet." And as I closed my bedroom door, that faint, knowing smile returned, because for the first time in a long while, I realized I wasn't as powerless as she thought. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses on your chest. I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the window where the moonlight painted silver lines on the floor. My daughter's words replayed in my mind, over and over. "Sign it over. Or leave." I ran my hand along the wooden frame of the bed, the one my husband built himself. The scent of varnish and old memories still lingered, faint but familiar. That's when the past began to unfold, slow and vivid. Like the turning pages of an old photo album. I could still see him, my husband, Arun, standing in this very spot 25 years ago, a hammer in one hand. And that boyish grin of his that could chase away any storm. He used to say, "This house will be our proof. Mira, that even the poorest start can build something that lasts." And he was right. Back then, we had nothing. No inheritance. No savings. Just a plot of dry land and a dream that refused to die. I remember working double shifts at the clinic, coming home with aching feet and a smile because I knew what we were building was more than walls. It was a future for our little girl. Every nail he drove into the beams, every brick we paid for penny by penny. It was all for her. There was laughter then, the kind that fills the air even long. After it's gone, I can still hear my daughter's tiny footsteps, echoing through the half-finished hallways, her giggles bouncing off bare walls. "Daddy! Daddy, look!" she'd cry, chasing her toy car across the dusty floor, and Aaron would scoop her up, twirl her around, both of them covered in paint and joy. This house, our house, was love made solid. It was birthdays with candles that dripped onto the kitchen counter, movie nights when the power went out and we lit candles instead. It was where I held Arun's hand the night he took his last breath, whispering promises I'm still trying to keep. When he was gone, this house became my anchor. Every creak in the floorboards, every breeze through the curtains, they all whispered his name. That's why it hurt so deeply, today, because the very child who once called this place home now sees it as nothing more than a piece of property. I got up and walked to the hallway, fingers brushing the family photos that still hung crooked from years of shifting frames. One in particular caught my eye, my daughter at 16, arms around both of us, smiling like she belonged nowhere else in the world. I traced her face with my thumb and whispered, "What happened to you, my girl?" The house didn't answer, but the silence spoke volumes, and as I stood there, surrounded by everything we built with love, I knew one thing for certain. They might want to take the walls, but they'll never take the memories, because this isn't just a house. It's our story, and I wasn't ready to let it end. Morning sunlight spilled across the living room, catching the dust motes that danced in the air. I stood there, cup of tea in hand, looking at the same walls that once echoed with laughter. But now, they only echoed with my own thoughts. I often wonder when it began. When did my daughter stop seeing me as her mother and start seeing me as an obstacle? It wasn't sudden, no. These things rarely are. Change crept in quietly, like a slow leak that you don't notice until the floor beneath you is soaked. After Aaron's passing, she was different, quieter at first, distant, always busy. I told myself it was grief. We all heal differently, don't we? But as months turned into years, that distance hardened into something else. It began with small things. A tone in her voice when I offered advice. A sigh when I asked for help around the house. "Mom, please," she'd say, rolling her eyes. "You worry too much." Times have changed. Then came the money, her new job, her new friends, people who wore designer clothes and never washed their own dishes. She wanted to fit in, to belong to their world. She started calling our home old-fashioned. She'd wrinkle her nose at the hand-stitched curtains I'd sewn, the same ones she once hid behind while playing hide-and-seek. "Mom," she'd laugh, "you really need to move with the times. Maybe sell this place and get something modern. Something that doesn't smell like memories. Smell like memories." She said it like it was a bad thing. When she married her husband, a businessman with polished shoes and an even more polished ego, I saw the final wall go up between us. At first, he was polite. Too polite. Then, slowly, his words started dripping with something else. Pity, mixed with superiority. "You shouldn't live alone, Mrs. Kapoor," he'd say, glancing around like my home was beneath him. There are great retirement communities these days. Clean, safe, convenient. He always said retirement like it was a gentle word. But to me, it sounded like exile. I would just smile and pour more tea. That was always my defense, quiet grace. But each visit, each conversation, left behind a small scar, and then came the whispers about investment, about property value. My daughter's tone changed again, softer when she wanted something, sharper when I said no. One evening, she said it outright. "Mom, this house could sell for millions now. Why are you holding on to it? You could live comfortably somewhere smaller." I looked at her, my only child, and said, "Because this is more than a house. It's your father's promise." She didn't respond. She just looked away, tapping her phone, her face lit by a glow that had nothing to do with love. That's when I knew. The seeds had already been planted. Seeds of entitlement. Watered by greed and pride. Still, I stayed quiet. Because sometimes silence is not weakness. It's patience. And I had learned that patience has a way of revealing people's true hearts. As I stood there that night, looking out at the old oak tree my husband planted for her when she was born, I whispered into the wind, "She's forgotten what roots mean." But I hadn't. And one day soon, she would remember, whether she wanted to or not. It happened on a Thursday morning. The air felt heavier than usual, as if the house itself knew something was coming. I was arranging flowers in the vase, lilies, my husband's favorite, when I heard a car door slam outside. 2 doors, actually. Moments later, my daughter and her husband walked in, dressed too neatly for a casual visit. She didn't hug me. She didn't even smile. Instead, she said, "Mom, we need to sort this house thing today. We brought someone to help." Behind them stood a man in a gray suit holding a briefcase. His smile was practiced, polite, the kind that hides sharp edges. "Mrs. Kapoor," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Mr. Mehra. I handle property transfers. Your daughter just wants to make sure everything's in order. Everything's in order." Such harmless words, but they stung like betrayal. They all sat down around the dining table, the same table where we once celebrated birthdays with homemade cake and paper. Hats now, it held legal documents and cold intentions. Daughter leaned forward, tapping a page with her manicured finger. "See here, Mom? It's just a transfer of ownership. You'll still be able to live here, of course, but it'll technically be under my name for convenience." "For convenience?" I repeated softly, staring at the paper. She mistook my silence for confusion. "Don't worry," she added quickly. "It's just paperwork. You won't even notice a difference." I wanted to laugh. Because there it was, the lie so casual it almost sounded kind. Her husband chimed in, voice smooth as silk. "It's safer this way, Ma. You'll be protected from, future complications." Future complications. They said it like they cared, but their eyes gleamed with ownership, not love. I looked down at my trembling hands. For a moment, I thought of Arun, of the promise we'd made, that our home would always belong to the one who truly understood its worth. And as I thought of him, my gaze drifted toward his old study door, still shut, still untouched since the day he left this world. Inside that room lay every document, every memory, every secret he ever kept. I took a deep breath and met my daughter's gaze. "You want me to sign this now?" She nodded eagerly. "Yes, the sooner, the better." "Do you remember," I asked quietly, "how your father used to make you read the labels on everything before you opened it?" Her expression twisted in annoyance. "Mom, this isn't a bedtime story. Please, just sign." The lawyer coughed lightly, glancing at his watch. "It really would be best if we completed it today." The words floated around me, hollow and distant. For a second, I almost gave in, almost. Then something inside me steadied, a whisper from Aaron. Maybe, or just my own heart refusing to break again. I stood up slowly. "I appreciate your concern," I said, voice calm but firm. "But I won't sign anything today. I'd like some time to read it properly." My daughter's face hardened. "Mom," I cut her off gently. "Your father taught me to never sign what I don't understand." The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. She exhaled sharply, snatching the papers from the table. "Fine, think about it. But don't take too long." Then she turned to her husband and stormed out, heels striking the floor like angry punctuation. When the door closed, the house exhaled with me, quiet, relieved, but trembling. I walked toward Aaron's study and rested my hand on the doorknob. It was cold, dust clinging to my fingers. Inside that room lay the truth, and somehow, I knew I was about to find something he never meant to leave hidden forever. The study door creaked open with a sound I hadn't heard in years, a tired groan, like the room itself waking from sleep. Dust floated in the air, catching the weak afternoon light that filtered through the curtains. Everything was just as he'd left it. His books lined the shelves in perfect order. History, poetry, law. His three great loves. On the desk sat his fountain pen, the same one he used to sign every important paper in our lives. I remember how he'd joke, "This pen only knows truth, Mira. It refuses to sign lies." I ran my hand across the wooden surface. My fingers brushed against an old photograph, our wedding day, two young fools with the whole world ahead of them. For a moment, my eyes softened, but then I noticed something else. A small key taped to the underside of the drawer. My heart skipped. I'd never seen it before. With trembling hands, I pulled the drawer open. Inside lay a bundle of papers tied together with a faded red ribbon. The edges were yellowed, but his handwriting, bold, steady, unmistakably his, leapt off the page. The top sheet read, "Last Will and Testament, Aaron Kapoor." I sank into the chair, breath caught somewhere between relief and disbelief. I'd seen his will before. Or so I thought. We'd written one together years ago, but this was different. I unfolded it carefully, reading every line as if I were hearing his voice again. He had written it after his diagnosis, in the months when he knew time was running short. "To my wife, Mira," it said, "I leave full and permanent ownership of our home and everything within it. This property shall never be signed away, transferred, or altered without her consent. It belongs to her alone, for as long as she lives." Tears blurred the ink as I kept reading. "I know our daughter will have her own dreams, her own family, and her own life. But this house is Mira's heart. If she ever faces pressure to give it up, this will shall protect her." I pressed the paper to my chest. He knew. Somehow. He'd seen this day coming, the arguments, the greed, the demand to sign it over. A sob escaped before I could stop it. Not of sadness, but of love, the kind that reaches beyond death to keep its promises. I sat there for a long time, the late sunlight stretching across the desk, warming my face. Slowly, the tears dried, replaced by something steadier, strength. For years, I'd let silence be my shield. But now, I understood, silence could also be power. I folded the will neatly, tied the ribbon again, and placed it in my bag. My hand lingered on it like it was a lifeline. Then I whispered to the empty room, "You always were one step ahead, weren't you, Aaron?" The faint creak of the ceiling fan was the only reply. But I felt him there, in the quiet, in the air, in the walls we'd built together. When I stepped out and locked the study behind me, I didn't feel weak anymore, because now I held not just a piece of paper, I held my freedom. And soon they would know it too. The morning began just like the one that broke me weeks ago. Sunlight slipped through the kitchen window, touching the same chipped teacup, the same faded curtains, the same silence. But I was not the same woman anymore. My daughter arrived in her usual flurry, perfume too sharp, heels too loud, words too quick. Behind her trailed her husband, eyes darting nervously. She didn't even greet me this time, just dropped a thick envelope on the table like a weapon. "Mother, the lawyer has the new papers ready," she said briskly. "All you have to do is sign here. We'll handle the sale and move you somewhere smaller, something comfortable for your age." Her voice was sugar-coated arrogance, the kind that expects obedience. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see my little girl. I saw a stranger carved by greed and entitlement. I lifted the envelope slowly. Inside were documents, property transfer, new ownership forms, even a power of attorney, all perfectly typed. All perfectly wrong. Sign it over or leave, she repeated, folding her arms. You're only making this harder on yourself. Her words hung in the air, heavy and cold. The same words she'd thrown at me the day she first demanded this house. Only this time I didn't flinch. Instead, I smiled. It wasn't a smile of surrender. It was the kind that comes from knowing something others don't, the kind that unsettles the guilty. I stood, walked to the sideboard and pulled out my handbag. From it I drew a small folder tied with a faded red ribbon. Her husband's eyes widened first. He recognized the seal before she did. "What's that?" she asked, her tone suddenly unsteady. "Your father's voice," I said softly. "One you refused to listen to while he was alive." I opened the document, my fingers steady as stone. "This house," I began, "wasn't mine to give you." "It was mine to keep," she frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Your father left this house solely to me," I said, my voice calm but sharp as glass. "He wrote that no one, not you, not your husband, not anyone, could ever take it from me. It is protected by his will, registered and witnessed." Her lips parted, disbelief flooding her face. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Then read it," I said, sliding the paper across the table. Her hands shook as she scanned the lines. I could almost see the words cutting her illusions apart. One clause, one signature, one truth at a time. By the time she reached the end, the color had drained from her cheeks. You hid this from me," she stammered. I met her gaze, unwavering. "No, my dear. I found what you refused to see. Your father's love for me and his disappointment in what you've become." Silence wrapped the room. Even the clock seemed to pause. Her husband cleared his throat, murmuring, "We should go." But she didn't move. Her pride was bleeding, and she couldn't stop the fall. As they turned to leave, I spoke one last time, softly, but with finality. "This house was built with love, not greed." "And love," I said, "can't be signed away." The door closed behind them with a hollow thud. For the first time in years, the house felt peaceful again, not empty, just mine. I walked to the window, letting the sunlight warm my face. In its glow, I could almost see Aaron's smile, that quiet, knowing smile, and I smiled back. Because justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it just smiles. The next morning, the air felt lighter, not because anything outside had changed, but because I had. For the first time in months, I woke without that dull ache in my chest. The sun was spilling through the curtains, golden and gentle, as if blessing this old house all over again. The silence that once felt heavy now sounded peaceful. I walked through each room slowly, barefoot, touching the walls, the doors, the little cracks in the paint that told their own stories. This home, my home, had survived storms, heartbreak, and time itself. And now it had survived greed too. My daughter didn't come back that day. Not the next either. When she finally did, it was only to collect her things. Her face was tight with resentment. Eyes that once held warmth now looked at me with something colder. She didn't say much. Just moved quickly, as if the house itself made her uncomfortable. At the door, she paused for a moment, her voice low and bitter. "You could have made this easier. Mom?" I looked at her, really looked. And for the first time, I saw her not as the little girl I raised, but as a woman consumed by something I never taught her. Entitlement. I smiled softly. "And you could have made it kinder." She didn't answer. Just turned away, slamming the door behind her. The echo rang through the hallway for a long time. But strangely, it didn't hurt anymore. I went out to the garden later that afternoon, Aaron's favorite spot. The soil was dry, the flowers wilted from neglect. I knelt down, pulling out weeds one by one. It felt like clearing old pain from the heart. Slow, deliberate, necessary. By the time the sun began to set, the roses were standing proud again. I could almost hear Aaron's laugh, deep and warm, carried in the evening breeze. "I did it, love," I whispered to the wind. "I kept our home safe." Inside, I made myself tea, not out of habit, but celebration. I sat by the window watching the light fade into soft twilight. It's funny. For years, I thought strength meant silence, endurance. But I've learned it's something gentler. It's knowing when to stand tall, even when your heart is breaking. A few weeks later, I decided to rent out one of the spare rooms. A young couple came by, newlyweds, polite and full of gratitude. They looked around the place with awe, not greed. When the girl turned to me and said, "It feels like a home built with love," I almost laughed. "Yes," I said quietly. "That's exactly what it is." And it was. Now every morning the house hums again. The sound of life returns. Laughter from the kitchen, footsteps in the hall, music playing faintly from someone's phone. Sometimes I sit on the porch with my tea, letting the world move gently around me. I don't think about what I lost anymore. I think about what I kept: dignity, peace, and the truth that love can't be signed away on a piece of paper. Because in the end, justice didn't come from anger, it came from calm, from choosing not to fight for power, but for peace. And as the sun rises over the garden each day, I smile the same smile I did when this all began. Quiet, knowing, unshaken. This house. My home is exactly where it belongs.